Everything in our society is backwards, isn't it? Have y'all noticed that? Have y'all noticed that doctors destroy health? Have you noticed that lawyers and judges, they destroy justice? How about institutions? They destroy knowledge. The media, they destroy information. Religions destroy spirituality. Heroes are turned into villains. Villains are turned into heroes. Everything is backwards. What do we do? How do we make any sense out of this? Why does history repeat itself? I've told y'all twice. I told you many times there's two main reasons. One is we don't have access to history. We don't really know what happened, so it's going to repeat. And of course we teach the same mistakes we were taught to our children, so that's the big way history repeats itself. Through our traditions. We start our journey off in life on the wrong path with false knowledge, making mistakes, living in the dark ages, where everything's backwards. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. Who are the heroes we're supposed to look up to? You don't know who they are because we've been told they're villains. You'll never look at what they did to figure out how we got to break this sick cycle we're in. How do we make sense out of all of it? Well, in this video, I'm going to help you guys try to evaluate information a little bit better, a little bit more objectively. And this isn't easy to do. The first thing we have to do is we want to gather all the evidence we can from both sides. Because there's always going to be two versions, right? Our problem in life is we only get one version. It's the wrong version. And then if we're ever shown the other version, we normally take each piece at a time and destroy it with the pieces we already have. That's not how you want to do it. You want to balance out your evidence. You want to get as much evidence on both sides, put it all together, walk away from it, come back to it with an understanding that you've got to look at everything a little bit differently now. Because what we're going to want to do with all this evidence is we want to assume both sides are right and we want to assume both sides are wrong. And what does that mean? It means we're going to end up with 4 versions. Do you get it? Think about what I'm just saying. Take any event in history, take any crime, and you got 2 versions. One's for, one's against. What you have to do to make any sense out of it is you got to gather evidence from both sides. When it comes to issues that are really important to us, we don't have that. It's all lopsided. We've been told a version, the official version, to keep us from understanding how to keep history from repeating itself. Don't you see? So what we have to do is be objective. As Aristotle said, the mark of an intelligent mind is the ability to entertain an idea without embracing it. So what I want to ask you to do, if you want to evaluate an event in history, you've got to consider the possibility that it's right and that it's wrong. And then when you look at all the evidence, you got to consider it's all right, it's all wrong, both sides. And when you gather all the evidence and you walk away from it and you come back to this evidence with an understanding that you got to look at it and not judge it as you let it all fit together. Because it will all come together. It will all come into little bitty groups. When you look at evidence for a crime, there may be 10 different categories. First category may have 10 pieces of evidence. The second category may have 30 pieces. The third category only 2. You see what I'm saying? So what we do is we gather all the evidence, got 100 pieces on both sides, put them all into categories based on what it's trying to prove. And now this is the tricky part. And a lot of us aren't qualified to do this because we don't understand the MO of a psychopath well enough. We haven't studied the Con Artist Handbook well enough to know what to look for so that we can then categorize the evidence into its appropriate category. So it's obvious if the evidence is true, then we're going to categorize the evidence according to what it proves. Is there a smoking gun? Okay, here's all the evidence for that smoking gun. Now what we have to do, and again, this is the tricky part, we got to assume that it's all a lie. And now this is what we have to understand from a big picture point of view, is that when we have a situation like this, where there's evidence saying it's true and evidence that's saying it's false, one's got to be 100% right pretty much, and the other's got to be 100% wrong pretty much, with a few exceptions. And then if it's wrong, how do we classify it? According to the evidence? No, this is the tricky part. And this is why a lot of us aren't quite qualified to do this. It may require a little extra work on your part to be able to figure out how to categorize the information if it's false. You have to understand what a con artist would do. What are con artist tactics? What do they do? Do they lie? Do they provide fake evidence? Do they trick you, deceive you? Do they talk in circles? Do they avoid the subject? Do they ignore the facts? Do they use red herrings? Straw man arguments? That's the key right there. When you start seeing all the evidence, you're going, wait a second. Here are 21 facts. I'm going to analyze it. If it's all true, I'll put them into these 10 categories. And if they're all false, I'll put them into these 7 categories. Look over here, I've got 3 straw man arguments. 2 times where they just simply ignored the question. Over here, 4 times they deny. This is when it becomes extremely obvious which side is true and which side is false. Because when you group the evidence based on it being wrong, based on how a con artist would lie to you, one side you're going to have a whole bunch of different ways they're doing it to you. And that's the side that's lying to you. On the other side, what you're going to find is there's only one way you can classify all of that information as a con artist tactic. Because they're not using straw man arguments, they're not trying to be deceptive, they're not twisting things, they're not avoiding subjects. There's only one possible explanation. Oh, they're just lying. Okay, that's one thing they do. But when all you have is, well, they've got 100 pieces of evidence here, it's all lies. But over here, we look at their 100 evidence. How many of them are straw man arguments? How many of them are using twisted logic, errors in reasoning? They're using all types of logical fallacies. They trick you, they confuse you, they ramble on and on. There's a lot of tactics they use, and if you don't understand the con artist tactics, the con artist handbook, if you don't understand the logical fallacies that are used by these tricksters, then you'll have a hard time seeing that they're obviously cons. Now, I've done that with information I've looked at, and it's extremely obvious. Once you gather enough evidence, now this is the key. If you're going to look at evidence, for example, for an event, and here's all of it evidence for, that's all you've been given, it happened, and you look at it and you already have it all bombarded in your brain, and not only have you been told this, but there have been movies about it, books about it. Every time you turn around, talk show hosts talk about it. We're always being reinforced that it's true. But then on the other side, that says it didn't happen, what you have to do is you don't want to look at any of that evidence piecemeal and compare it one by one to the other side in the beginning. You got to look at all of it in its entirety. Then when you look at all of its entirety, you go, okay, I don't see a whole bunch of deception at all. There's no deception over here unless everything's got to be a lie. And yet, most of the evidence, there's no way it could be a lie. It's indisputable. Right now, most of us can't do that about really important events in history because we've been given too much information and too many references that support one version. And very few people go out and gather all the other evidence so they can look at the big picture before they compare them. You don't want to take line by line and compare. Because as soon as you look at the first evidence that says, no, it didn't, you're going to come over here and say, yes, it did. And I know that's true because I got all these other references that support it. And I got all these other pieces that I already know is true. And that's why it doesn't work. So what you got to do is you got to look at all the evidence all the evidence and say, is it true, is it false? Well, I don't see any deception. But then when I know what to look for and I come back over here and I look at this side, well, wait a second. There's all sorts of deception. Obvious deception. There's fake evidence that's been presented. No fake evidence over here, fake evidence over here. So, it's not easy to make sense out of all of this. There's only one way to do it. You got to gather all the evidence, put it together, learn to reevaluate this objectively, as an intelligent person would. You got to consider the possibility. It could be wrong, or it could be right. And when you do that, it's very obvious. And why? Because one side is all lies. The problem is if we've been bombarded with all that our entire lives. So the first thing we have to do is empty our cup. Got to gather all the other evidence we don't have. In fact, if you're to gather all the evidence on one event and then evaluate it as, well, have you ever heard this version? How much of this version have you heard? How much of this version have you heard? Well, I heard of all this that says it happened. I hadn't heard any of this. That should tell you something, shouldn't it? Why? Because history is written by the people who control the present. That's what George Orwell meant in 1984. He who controls the present or the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past. The past is history. All you have to do is control what we know. If we've been told things happened, we'll never figure things out if they didn't happen, and they're used to cover up something more important. Now, most of what I'm talking about right now is to cover up a really important topic. It has to do with usury. It has to do with loaning money at interest. It has to do with the absolute tool of control. It's what a very small group of people use so they can then own and control all these other major sectors of human endeavor that can then bombard our brain with so much bullshit that it has become Satan's secret weapon. I did a special video on that. I'll put a link down below. Where the people who rule the world rely on this. They know they've implanted these belief systems in our brains based on all these references so that when the real truth comes along so that we can make sure history doesn't repeat itself, we're going to reject it. There's a way around it. Open up your mind. Empty your cup. Entertain more than one possibility at the same time. Look at all the evidence separately on both sides. Look at it as if it's true or if it's false. When you do, one side, there's no falsity to it. There's no deception to it. The other side is riddled with deception. And keep in mind, the people who rule the world, they're psychopaths. They are con artists. They're magicians. They're masters of illusion, masters of misdirection. Life is all one big con on this planet. We're being tricked, we're being deceived, we're being duped by some very clever people that know that we don't think like them. But we can figure out what's going on if we can just study these people, because they're very predictable. Psychopaths are very predictable. Their MOs divide and conquer. They have to remain invisible. So they always have to twist things around and make sure that we don't focus on them. Try to have an intelligent conversation with somebody on a message board and they never defend their position. All they do is keep attacking you. That's their tactic. It's just attack, 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 attack. That's another one of the con artist tactics. Attack the messenger. How many times did they attack the messenger? Well, wait a second. We got this guy over here that proved, that says that it couldn't have happened. Oh, but he's not an engineer. Well, wait a second. Why are you attacking him? What about what he says? You know what? What he's pointing out, you don't have to be an engineer to figure out. It's common sense. So, sit down before a fact like a little child, my friends, and be prepared to give up every preconceived notion. What you got to do is gather all the evidence. Look at the evidence you haven't seen before. How can you evaluate evidence you haven't even seen? You can't. Condemnation without investigation is the height of ignorance. And yet, most of us do that because we're lazy, aren't we? Best definition I ever heard for prejudice is you're lazy. It's a great labor-saving device. Allows you to formulate an opinion without doing any effort. Don't be lazy, man. And don't waste your time looking at things that don't make any difference. There's a lot of topics where it's a psyop. It's designed to distract us. But when it comes to the absolute tool of control, when it comes to usury, when it comes to the loaning money of interest, we have to understand all the stories that are tied together. Here's an interesting connection. Do you know, have you ever heard of the Bank for International Settlements? That was created by the League of Nations, that ultimately became United Nations. This is a group of organizations created by the elite, the very small group of people, so they can have a one world government. WHO, World Health Organization, all these organizations were all created at the same time at the late 1940s, the same time shadow governments were installed all around the world. And what they created was this Bank for International Settlements. And it was based in Switzerland, which is an independent country. It's not part of the EU. It's just like the Vatican City is independent. It's an independent country. City of London, independent country. Washington, D.C., it's an independent country. You're no longer part of the country you think you belong to. But the League of Nations created the Bank for International Settlements to steal money from Germany after World War I. That's the same bank that's set up to steal money from everyone around the world. That's when it was set up. So there's a lot of history that they don't want us to know because it's all going to tie back into usury. What is the Bank for International Settlements? This is the central bank for the international bankers who rule the world. That's how we're being ruled. It's through the use of usury. So every piece of a story that ties into that event has been altered so you won't look into it and figure out, well, wait a second. What are they doing to us? Why was that bank created? And why are countries around the world facing bankruptcy? You know, Iceland finally said, we don't believe we owe this debt. We're going to audit the books. That was quite a while back, too. Turned out 93% of the debt was odious debt. It was made up. It was bogus. Say they, with our country here in America, $21 trillion, it's bogus. We get rid of that immediately. We don't owe that money to these international bankers. And again, what was the Bank for International Settlements set up for? To take money away from all these other countries to feed to a very small group of people so they can own and control everything. So it's not easy to de-indoctrinate ourselves. Best way to start is to detoxify yourselves first. Take a solid food vacation. I was watching a stupid show last night that was saying, oh my God, she's into her third week of not eating. Her brain is shrinking and it's hurting her. Boy, talk about a bunch of brainwashing. That was on Naked and Afraid. That show's all about being afraid of not eating. Taking a solid food vacation. Oh my God, 3 weeks into it, your brain's gonna start shrinking. The pain is horrible. Oh! This girl's having a cleansing reaction or something. And they're acting like, oh my God, if you don't eat for 3 weeks, your brain's gonna start shrinking. It's gonna hurt you. Bullshit. In biblical days, you had to do a 40-day water fast, solid food vacation on water, before they'd even allow you into an institute of higher learning. Because they knew your brain wouldn't work worth a darn. Because it's all filthy. Again, not easy to be de-indoctrinated in this society. So it begins through detoxification. Take a solid food vacation, but do it on juices instead. A lot easier than it is on water. Guarantee your brain ain't going to shrink either way. And then that's how you begin by making some sense out of all of this. Because there are revolutions going around all around us. We're waking up on a lot of different levels. It's up to you to find out where you fit amongst this group. If you have expertise in law and finance, then you focus more on what I'm talking about on that end of the story. For the rest of us, we're on the hero's journey. The main thing we can do to make our lives better and everyone else around us better is to get them to take a solid food vacation so they can detoxify. Help them understand what it's going to take to de-indoctrinate themselves. Got to look at evidence on both sides. Consider it the possibility that it's all both right and both wrong. And when you do that, it becomes clear. One side's poppycock. Those are the sides of the truth. And when you can see the difference, oh, you're in for a treat.